So recently I've been unpacking new elements of my childhood trauma, and I just got to the box labeled ADHD and potential ADHD. So here are some of the lovely things that I was guilted, shamed, or punished for, which are now clear signs of ADHD and maybe some other neurospiciness. Number 1, being diagnosed with a learning disability. Yeah, listen up to this. When I was like 6 or 7 years old, I got tested and put in the gifted program at school because they said I had an above average IQ. But in that same test, I also got diagnosed with a learning disorder. A learning disorder in math. They said I couldn't read the numbers or make sense of them. My mom was super shamed about this, and she put me in tutoring, secret tutoring after school for a long time, where she would drive me to another town for a math tutor, which didn't go well because I still didn't get better at math. 2, emotional outbursts. I would get super overwhelmed, and then I would have gigantic emotional outbursts. Never really at other people, but just I would melt down, screaming, crying, throwing up, needing to lay in bed with the lights off and the covers over my head for like 2 hours. From a young age. What I was not able to voice as a child is the sensory element of this. Every single time I had one of these meltdowns, there was some sensory overwhelm happening. It could have been stuff that was going on with my clothes, like especially if my clothes got wet or damp and stuck to me, or the socks were weird or wrong, or things were too tight, touching the wrong places. Or it was like a sensory overwhelm of doing all this emotional labor for all the adults around me, and I would literally physically feel like I was gonna peel my skin off of my body if one more person said anything to me or touched me or looked at me. Sensory issues. I also had a lot of sensory issues with food, which got me in a lot of trouble too. A complete preoccupation with, obsession with, and at the same time, inability to understand social cues. I literally remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, it may have been about 10, but I remember literally having the thought of, you've got to study, like, look at their faces, look at their bodies. What are they doing? What does that mean? You have to show that back to them so they understand what you mean. Come on. Whatever number this is, hyperfixation. My childhood was built on the building blocks of the volcano eyewitness book, Ancient Egypt, and the Romanovs. When I was into something, I was into something. I once spent a whole summer dedicating myself 6 hours a day to reading hieroglyphics alone in my room with the one book that my mother had bought me from some bookshop in another state. And when I would talk about those hyperfixations, these things that I was so passionate about, so interested about, that I was like, oh my God, you guys all need to know about this because this applies to our lives and this could help us be better humans right here and right now. I got family, friends, all of them being like, oh God, okay, yeah, volcanoes in Pompeii. And last but not least, social contract expectations. I was under the assumption that when I engaged in a social contract with someone, they were playing by the same terms. And that was very often not the case. And then when I looked like an idiot, I got bullied and shamed and punished and all these other kinds of things. Like, how could you possibly do that with that person? How could you assume that they would be a good person? That's on you. You deserve that happening. I couldn't tell they were a bad person. Oh, the joys of a neurodivergent childhood.